Hello my loves, welcome back. Today we are going through the entire plot of another classic book. So I have a feeling it's going to be a long one. Get a drink, get cozy, whatever you need to get yourself comfortable for this. So today's classic book is Frankenstein, one of the most well-known and one of the first sort of gothic horror sci-fi type books, published in 1818 by the absolutely wonderful Mary Shelley. If you haven't seen any of my explaining classics before, I am doing this purely to make classics more accessible. So if people feel like they can't or don't want to read classics, they don't have to. They still know what's happened in those books and they can go and live their best Richard Peyton life and pretend that they have read them. This is not me saying people shouldn't read these classics. If you want to read them, definitely. I personally enjoy some of them, not all of them. This is more just if you've always kind of been curious but can't be bothered to read the whole book, or it just feels inaccessible to you, or you don't like classics, then this is for you, really, so you know what actually happens in these books. I did a whole explanation of why I'm doing this series in my first video in this series, which was A Christmas Carol, so if you want to know the whole explanation, go there. Otherwise, let's get straight into it. We start Frankenstein with a series of 4 letters from a man called Richard Walton to his sister. Now, who is Richard, you might ask? He's not really mentioned anywhere when we discuss Frankenstein. Richard is I don't know how old man who wants to discover the North Pole. Is it the North Pole? One of the poles. I think it's the North Pole. He wants to go there by ship and he wants to sort of make scientific breakthroughs, essentially, by discovering things that other people haven't. And he talks in his letter, his first 2 letters, very much about how he sort of was left to teach himself things as a child. He read a lot of accounts of seafarers and people going on sea voyages and just really wanted to be like them. But his dad, for some reason, had been like, no, you're not allowed to do that. So he decided to be a poet instead, but then he sucked at it, so he didn't carry on with that. Basically, he is recounting his entire life to his sister in these letters, even though his sister would have been present for his life, so would have probably already known that. So it's just a bit of a exposition dump. But anyway, he then goes on to say he has inherited some money, he can now secure himself a ship and a crew, and he's gonna do it. He's gonna make his dream a reality. And you get the impression his sister is quite concerned about him, and he's trying to sort of assure her that, you know, it's gonna be okay, that he can do this, and he's really excited about it. But also he like signs off every letter with something like, well, I'll either see you again or I'll never see you again, depending on the success of this voyage, which is quite funny. And then his letters sort of get a bit shorter, just saying, you know, we're traveling, things going well, I found a crew. He talks a lot about the different crew members and gives great detail of how amazing all of these men are. He goes into a lot of unnecessary detail about all these people, which is really not relevant to the story at all. We never see them again, so he's basically just talking about what good people they are and that the voyage is generally going well. But then in letter 4, they're stuck in ice. They can't move, there's mist all around, so they can't see either. They just have to like sit there and wait it out. And this is where he starts to be like, oh shit, maybe I'm not gonna come home. But then through the ice and mist, what do they see? A massive man on a sled. A massive man on a sled being pulled by dogs across the ice, and he just kind of speeds off, disappears. And yeah, so they lose sight of this gargantuan fast man, but then they see another man, a normal sized man who approaches the ship and is talking to the crewmates, and then Richard goes over and they have to convince this man to come on ship, which he's a bit confused by because he's like, mate, it's freezing, you're probably gonna die if you stay out here, why would you not just come on board? But this man who comes aboard the ship, we discover is Victor Frankenstein, and Victor is talking about how he needs to get the one who escaped, aka the gargantuan fast man. on a sled. He takes some time to rest. He's not very well because he's been out in the cold and he's basically exhausted himself. So he takes some time to rest, and then him and Richard grow close. They become really good friends. Richard seems to like worship Frankenstein, despite the fact they've literally known each other a few days, if that. When Frankenstein's feeling a little bit better and, you know, they're talking more, Richard is explaining what they're doing, and they're going to try and make scientific discoveries, and he makes a comment about how as long as he makes those discoveries, as long as he gets that knowledge that other people haven't, he doesn't care if he loses all his money, all his possessions, even the life of one of the crew, he doesn't care as long as he gets that knowledge. And Frankenstein is like, mate, I need to tell you a story. I need to warn you about being that obsessed and that determined to find something out and get this knowledge. I need to tell you my story so that you will learn not to do that. So that you will learn that there are things that are more important than knowledge, essentially. And then the book goes into chapters, and then it's just Frankenstein telling his entire story. Right. My mate, Victor Frankenstein, he's not my mate. I actually detest this man, as you'll find out more as we go through the story. He does not know how to tell a story succinctly. If you thought Van Helsing was bad in Dracula for not being able to answer a simple yes or no question without babbling on for 10 pages, you have not met Victor Frankenstein. This man just does not know what information is relevant to the story and what is not. So he literally goes back to the beginning of this story is when his parents met. I would argue not really necessary for Robert to know, but anyway. Was I calling him Richard? His name's Robert. I don't know if I was doing that or not. Anyway, he goes back to when his parents were born, which is a bit of a weird story. It's really not relevant to the book or anything that happens at all, but I'll tell you just because it's a bit weird. So his dad was like really rich, and he had this really good friend who, I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember his name because he really, again, he's not an important character to the plot. But he was really good friends with this man. This man had a daughter, and they were generally quite well off until somehow they lost all of their money. I don't really remember how they lost all their money, but they did. And they were thrown into a life of poverty, and Victor's dad went to go visit his friend, and he was basically on his deathbed. His daughter was like, I don't know how old she was at that point, but you know, like maybe a teenager or something. I don't really remember. She's been like looking after him, trying to look after the household with their limited funds. And then the friend dies, and Victor's dad decides, oh, I'll marry the daughter then and save her from this life of poverty. And you know, they do actually have quite a nice relationship, but that was your best mate's daughter that you've known since she was born. That's a bit weird. Anyway, that's Frankenstein's parents. They travel a lot. So Frankenstein's childhood, for most of it, is spent with him traveling. His mum remembers what it's like to experience hardship and poverty. So she, whenever they're traveling, goes to visit the poor wherever they are to help them sort of provide some relief. They go to this one house and find this woman with like 6 children or something, but one of them looks completely different to the rest. And we discover it's because it's not actually her child. She's taken it in from someone else to try and look after it when she was more affluent, but now she's fallen on hard times. And Victor's mum really takes a liking to this girl and decides, well, I'll just adopt her, she's mine now. And this is Victor's, therefore, adopted sister. Just like to emphasise that point for later. Adopted sister, but for some reason they call each other cousins. Elizabeth. They then are sort of growing up together, and they get on really well while they're growing up together, you know. Just as well as adopted siblings might. They then decide the parents decide to stop travelling around so much because they have another child, and they just sort of settle in Geneva. And this is when Frankenstein's love of natural sciences begins. He starts reading all of these books about the very early natural scientists who were looking, you know, trying to discover like the elixir of life and things like that. and the secrets of immortality and what makes someone alive and things like that. And he becomes very interested in this and starts sort of pursuing this as an interest. And then his dad finds out what he's reading, and his dad's like, that is a load of shit, and it's really out of date. Don't read that. Like, that's just, don't read that. Frankenstein then is like, oh, my dad saying this is cemented my path. If only he'd said to me, read this instead, then maybe I would have taken a turn. But no, fate led me down this path of the natural sciences. And that's Victor's childhood, essentially, is just him being a little nerd. We skip forward in the next chapter. He is 17. He's about to go off to university. His parents thought it was important for him to go to uni somewhere else so he could experience other cultures, so he's traveling far away from Geneva. He also has this really close friend called Henry, who they wanted to go to university together, but for whatever reason Henry's dad is like, no, you're not allowed to. So Henry has to stay at home. But just as Frankenstein's about to leave, his mum dies, which is sad, but honestly it's not really, what's the word? It's not dwelled upon in the story. He's just like, oh, I'm really sad. I thought about it for the whole journey to university, and then, well, that's it. My mom's dead. I'm fine now. There is then a clue here as well of his mum mentioning the union between him and Elizabeth, you know, his adopted sister. But then that's not revisited for a while, so we forget about that for now. But anyway, he goes off to uni. So he has two professors, he takes two classes, natural sciences and chemistry. The natural sciences professor says very similar things to what Frankenstein's dad says when he finds out what he's been reading. Basically, he's like, why have you been reading this? This is a load of shit. You need to catch up and read things that are current and what's actually happening in medicine and science and the body and what we know about it now. And recommends all of these other books to read. But Frankenstein is just like, well, I don't like you anymore. I'm not going to go to any of your lectures because you've just been rude to me and said I shouldn't read all these people. He just stops going to lectures for a while, but then decides to go to a chemistry lecture, and the chemistry professor is like amazing. It's like, you can tell it's supposed to be one of those moments in a film, like, you know, where like a teacher or a parent figure or an authority figure makes some speech and it like inspires all the children. It's something I can imagine. I've never watched Glee, but something I can imagine happening in Glee where everyone's like, oh my god, amazing, we're all so inspired to do this thing, but would never happen in real life. Like that. His chemistry teacher gives a speech like that, and Frankenstein's like, oh my god, I must recommit myself to the natural sciences. I am going to do this, and I'm going to incorporate chemistry into this as well. And he goes to speak to the professor, and he's a bit nicer about the books he's been reading. Then at the end of that chapter, he's like just saying he truly then starts to believe he's got some like greater purpose that he needs to fulfill, and something to discover and to achieve. From here, it's then a bit of a whirlwind of the things that happen next. So he dedicates himself to his studies, he progresses very quickly and is just suddenly very clever, amazing student. Everyone's so impressed with him, but he never really dwells on how this happened or what he's actually doing. And at this point he becomes obsessed with the idea of what makes something alive and how to make something alive if it is not alive or dead. And then he just very casually says, oh, I discovered what that was, but I'm not going to tell you because I don't want you to know how to do that. I find that hilarious because he's just like, yeah, I found it out, by the way, but nowhere in the book is it going to explain how I did that. I think it does serve, like, you know, the plot point of him telling the story and therefore not wanting to share it because he doesn't want anyone to do the same thing he did. But also I think Mary Shelley just didn't want to write something that, or like try and figure out a way that would be like vaguely possible to do but also still science fiction-y. So I think it's a clever like part of his character, but also just like the author not wanting to write it, which do you know what? I appreciate it. Fair enough, Mary Shelley, honestly. Anyway, as soon as he's discovered this, he then is like, obsessed with trying to prove his theory and starts collecting materials, which basically just means body parts. So he's going like to graves in different places to collect all of these body parts to put together so he can test this theory of what makes someone alive. And this becomes like all encompassing for him. He is ignoring letters from his family and from his friends. He's not really doing much apart from being dedicated to this cause. Now, chapter 5 is where things should kick off, but actually they're quite anticlimactic. So he completes his creation. He does it. He's put together these materials, he's put together these body parts, and he's made a living being. His creation, which I'm just gonna say at this point, his creation, his monster, whatever you want to call him, never gets given a name throughout the book, which I feel like is deliberate, but also it annoyed me. So I have decided to name his creation Jerry. So whenever I refer to Jerry, I mean Frankenstein's creation, okay? He immediately, as soon as he sees Jerry on the table, is disgusted. I don't know how he didn't notice this beforehand. Me and my mum were talking about this. The body was on the table. You could see it all already, but it's not until he's like reanimated the corpse that he's like, oh my god, it's hideous. Before that, he thought it looked fine, which doesn't really make sense. But anyway, he is like saying, oh, he picked out all of these things purposefully to make them look beautiful, but also he wanted him to be massive for some reason. And he's just disgusted. Everything about Jerry, he's like, oh, gross. Not for me. And he just runs out of the room. Like, Jerry gets up and is probably very confused, and Frankenstein just books it out of the room, shuts the door, and is like, nope, I'm not dealing with that. That's not my problem. So he's in a bit of a state. He runs outside, and who does he bump into? Henry, his friend who wasn't able to come to uni. Henry has now been allowed to come. His father finally agreed to let him come to the same university as Victor. So Victor's like, oh, thank god my friend's here. He feels a bit better, but also he doesn't want Henry to know what he's done because he's shamed by what he's done and feeling very guilty and just doesn't want anyone to know. Before bringing Henry back to like his house or where he's living at the time, he like goes to check, and Jerry's fucking disappeared. He's not in the room anymore. He's just run away. And Victor is like, well, that's fantastic. I don't need to deal with that anymore then. Problem solved. There won't be any consequences to this. And he's just really happy because he's a fucking idiot. He is so happy when he realizes this that he becomes a bit manic, and Henry's a bit like, dude, are you okay? Victor then like collapses. He's exhausted himself. He's very, very stressed after creating a disgusting human and then realizing he's not here anymore and he doesn't have to deal with it. So he's just exhausted himself from all of that. And he gets ill for like months. He is just bedridden. Henry looks after him and updates his family on what's happening. As he's recovering, he gets a letter from Elizabeth to just say like, you know, let us know what's happening. Please let us know because we don't know if you're okay. We just want to receive a letter that we know you've written, so like in your handwriting, so that we know you're okay. And she also just gives him a load of gossip about what's been happening, most of which is not relevant to the story. Like there's some people she talks about that never come up ever again, but she does say that they've taken in like a maid type person. I don't really know what she is, but her name's Justine and she's really nice, and they saved her from some bad situation and now she's much happier and she's really sweet. Aside from that, you don't need to know any of the rest of the details of that letter because it was not important. So Victor like immediately replies to this letter saying he's feeling better and that he's hoping he'll come home soon, and just basically like puts her mind at ease. And then for the next, I don't know how long it is, I think at one point it mentioned it's like 2 years, but I don't really know. Or like it's like a year, I think. Him and Henry just have a great time at uni. They go to lessons and lectures and stuff. They go to, I don't know, pubs and go to social events and stuff. I don't know what they do, but they just have a great time. They just have fun. And Victor forgets all about Jerry for a bit. He's not his problem anymore. He is out of sight, out of mind, essentially, is what Victor is thinking at this point. But oh, what happens next? Victor is arranging to go back home and he gets a letter from his dad. And his dad is like, look, son, I didn't want to just tell you to come home and then you find out when you're here. So you need to know before you get back here, your little brother's been murdered. And he tells the whole story of it. His little brother was out playing hide and seek with his sister, his other little brother. And then he goes missing. They spend the whole night looking for him and then they eventually find his body, and he has like marks around his neck, as if he's been strangled, and a piece of jewelry that Elizabeth had given him is missing. So they think, okay, someone wanted to steal that, but then they also murdered him. So Victor is understandably very upset, shows the letter to Henry, and then they immediately go back home to Geneva. By the time they get there, Victor can't get into the family home. The town is like locked for whatever reason at a certain time of night. So he just kind of wanders around and decides to go to the place where the body was found. And he's just kind of sitting there for a bit, and then he sees a giant person walking through the trees. Who is it? It's Jerry. And he's like, oh shit, Jerry killed my brother. There were consequences to my actions. He doesn't pursue him or anything, he thinks about it, but he's just in too much of a state to really do anything. And also, despite Jerry being like patchworked together and massive, he's somehow got like superhuman speed and is like really fast, which also is never explained at all. But anyway, he just like runs off, and Victor just sits there until he can go back home. And when he does get back home, everyone's sort of talking about how they think Justine, the maid who Elizabeth wrote about, is the one who killed the brother, because they found that locket that was stolen. She had it, so like, oh, it must have been her who killed him. So Victor is like pretty sure she didn't do it, obviously, because he thinks Jerry did it, but he can't tell anyone this. So this becomes a common fucking theme for Frankenstein, of him just being like, well, it can't have been her because it was something else, and just makes like a vague but kind of like leading statement. So it's like he doesn't want people to know, but he keeps nearly telling them. Like, he's not trying to keep it a secret at all. And it's just really irritating. And also, I don't understand why no one then asked further. Like, what the fuck are you talking about, mate? How do you know it was someone else? Who are you talking about? But anyway, he doesn't think it's Justine. Elizabeth doesn't think it's Justine either, because she really liked Justine and so she's really sweet. She would never do something like this. She's cared for people, and it's just very out of character for her. So that might be why they don't really question it further. But anyway, a trial happens. Statements are given in terms of like the order of events and like where Justine was, and it's all quite circumstantial evidence. However, she is convicted in the end, to be hanged for the murder. And then Elizabeth and Frankenstein go and visit her the night before she's going to be hanged, and she basically says she was coerced into giving a statement. She was coerced into confessing, and it was all very religious. She was told that she needed to confess in order to go to heaven, but she's like, well, now I've lied. So yeah, she and Elizabeth and Frankenstein still, you know, say that they don't believe she did it and that they'll try and get her out, but unfortunately they don't get her out of prison and she is hanged. Victor then just basically spends a really long time feeling very guilty and just pitying himself for his own actions, that he still seems to show no insight into what he's done wrong, but more so just feeling very sorry for himself, that, oh, this was my fault and now she's died, but also can't really understand fully what he's done wrong. He's sort of missing the larger picture here. But anyway, we'll come back to that later. The next few chapters, or the next chapter, is literally just Victor being depressed for a while. Just, again, that internal self-loathing, annoying monologue of him being like, I shouldn't have done this is all my fault, which, yeah, it is his fault. But anyway, his dad's trying to like make him feel better, Elizabeth's trying to make him feel better, but eventually he just like can't be in the house anymore and he just goes out walking. He ends up in a little village somewhere after like walking all day and feels a little bit better. So then he just like carries on hiking up the mountains essentially in the hopes that the fresh air's helping. He's gonna feel better and less fucking sorry for himself soon. But he goes up to the mountains one day, and who does he find? Jerry. Of course Jerry's there. Jerry just seems to be following Victor around everywhere at this point. Victor is like really annoyed at him. He's like, you killed my brother. I actually don't remember what he said. He's very angry at him, and Jerry is just quite calm and trying to explain things to him, but Victor's just being a little bitch about it until eventually he's like, okay, I'll hear you out. And they sit down together to talk. And then the next few chapters switch to Jerry's point of view, where he is then telling his story. So Jerry basically explains that when he was first made, he was very confused. Like, no one was there. Everything was really loud, too bright, just sensory overload. He didn't understand what was happening. It takes him a while to make sense of the world, and he essentially just spends a lot of time living in the woods, like eating berries and nuts and shit, until he starts to come across like little houses. And obviously Jerry hasn't been taught about society or people, so he doesn't understand that it's rude to just go into their homes and take their food, but so that's what he does. Goes into a few homes and like scares people and they just run away and he takes their food. But then eventually he goes into one and there's like screaming, and that alerts everyone else in the village, so the entire village comes to like throw rocks at him and stuff, and he like runs away and is really scared, and then doesn't want to go in any more houses or be near people anymore because he thinks they're gonna like hurt him, and he's just generally quite scared. He comes across a cottage though, but he's too scared to go inside because of what's happened, so he just builds himself like a little hut outside to live in, and he just kind of spies on the people who live in the cottage. So when they're like asleep, he'll go and take some food from them, and then he'll just like sleep in his little hut and listen to what they're saying. He can't understand what they're saying because he has no language abilities yet. He hasn't been taught how to speak or how to comprehend language, so he's just kind of more watching them. Through watching them, starts to realize that actually they're quite poor, they're not doing very well, so he then stops taking food from them and instead goes back to foraging in the woods at night. And he also starts chopping down wood and leaving it in front of their door for them every night, so that the son doesn't have to do that anymore, and he can sort of spend his time doing other things with his sister, like helping her out or doing other things that need to be done around the house instead of going in and collecting wood. He starts to pick up on certain words and their meanings and starts to somewhat understand them, but obviously still doesn't really know 100% what's going on. But he feels almost a sort of, not kinship, but I suppose kinship towards them. He wants to help them and protect them and just make their lives easier and happier, essentially. Then someone comes to visit the cottage. This is like quite a while later. Like weeks, months potentially later. The son, whose name is Felix, appears to be very, very happy and excited that this girl's here. This girl does not speak the same language as the rest of the family, so they start to teach her, which is very, very convenient for Jerry because he can now listen into these lessons and learn as well. So he already, like I said, has a bit of understanding, but he then, through listening into these lessons they're giving this girl, he sort of picks things up faster and can start to understand conversations and what they're saying to each other. So the family then also, to like aid in the study, start reading to Safi, which is the girl who's come to stay with them's name. And through this, Jerry then starts to learn about culture, religion, politics, society. He starts to learn more about the world and things that someone else maybe should have taught him before this but didn't. Anyway, through listening to this, he and from observing the family, he starts to realize how different he is from everyone, and that he probably is never going to fit into this society or this world, and sort of starts to then sort of talk about how death seems to be the only escape that he has from the pain of isolation that he's feeling. We then learn more about the cottage's histories, which I suppose isn't really that relevant, but I'll tell you anyway. To cut a long story short, they used to be very wealthy, but for some reason So Safi's dad was a merchant who hated the French government and ended up being sentenced to death for doing something in opposition to them. I don't really remember what. And for some reason, Felix decides he's going to help this complete stranger escape from prison and avoid the death penalty. So Felix, his dad, and Agatha, which is the sister, join in the plan too. And the merchant basically offers Safi's hand in marriage to Felix as a reward, which was gross, but anyway. So they managed to pull it off, he escapes, but the merchant doesn't want his daughter marrying a Christian, and he starts to think of ways he can like get out of this deal that he's made of marrying Safi to Felix. So they're like hiding out somewhere with the intention of him going on somewhere else and Safi and Felix going back to wherever they were. But then the French authorities start to sort of figure out where they are. So Felix is basically like, look, I'm gonna go, you stay here, I'll come back for Safi when it's safe. But the merchant, as soon as Felix is gone, is like, nope, I'm taking her, we're gonna go back to Turkey, I think. And Safi's like pissed at this. She's like, you've deceived him, this is not what I want, this is not what he wants, this is not fair. But he's like, look, we're just gonna do it anyway, I don't care. So Felix then doesn't know where Safi is, he can't come back and get her. However, the authorities start to like get on to the merchant, so he flees and just leaves Safi there. And she's like, well, fuck this, I'm gonna go back and find Felix because I'm not going back with him, because she doesn't want to go back to the role she would have to play in that society. But because of their involvement, Felix and his family, because of their involvement in that, they are exiled, and hence they now live in a tiny cottage and are poor, and Safi has only just managed to find him and come back. Yeah, that's their story. Moving on from that, it's spring, everyone's happy. Jerry finds some books, I don't remember where, and starts to read them. These sort of bring up more emotions for him, predominantly that feeling of not fitting in or not having people and feeling quite lonely. So he decides he's going to try and introduce himself to the family, and this is something he thinks about for a very long time, about how the best way to do it is and how they'll react. And you know, he has those happy thoughts of, oh my god, they'll love me, they'll welcome me in, and then he has these other thoughts of, god no they won't, they'll hate me and, you know, throw stones at me like those other villagers did. And he just debates it for a very, very long time. What he eventually decides to do is go in when it's just the dad who's home, because the dad is blind, so he won't be able to see how hideous Jerry is. So he's like, if I just go when he's there, I'll be able to sort of get to know him, and then because he thinks I'm alright, he might be able to introduce me to the rest of the family. So he does that, and things are going well until the rest of the family come home earlier than expected, and immediately I think Agatha faints at the sight of Jerry, which the amount of people who just fucking faint in this book at the sight of him, I mean, yeah, I appreciate lots of parts of dead bodies stitched together actually probably is quite a surprising sight. But just so many people faint or get weak from the stress of Jerry being Jerry, and it's just poor Jerry, you know? But anyway, yeah, Agatha faints, Safi runs away, and Felix just attacks Jerry. So there's a moment where Jerry's like, I could very easily have just killed him in that moment because he's so much stronger than Felix, but he doesn't. He just runs away and is like, well, I fucked my chance, they're never going to accept me. But he's like, okay, look, maybe I can have a second chance. He goes back, and they've all moved out. They don't feel safe there anymore. They don't want to live somewhere where Jerry knows where they live. And Jerry is just angry about this. Again, it's just that feeling of no one loves me, no one accepts me, everyone thinks I'm a monster and I haven't even fucking done anything. I've been helping these people for months and they're just attacking me. He decides that he hates humans. He burns their cottage down and then decides, right, this is all Frankenstein's fault, which it is. So I'm gonna go after him and make his life miserable because that's what he's done to me. Then we kind of come back full circle. So he goes to Geneva. On the way he comes across a small child who's drowning and he saves her. But the dad then comes along and is like, get away from her, you fucking monster. And that just cements his hatred of humans, the fact that he's just saved this girl's life, and the dad's like, what the fuck are you doing to my daughter? So on his way to the house, he just happens to come across Frankenstein's brother. He doesn't realize it's his brother. He just wants to be friends with someone, and then he's like, well, maybe a child will accept me because children don't have these fixed beliefs about society yet. But the child is like, get away from me. Actually, Frankenstein is in Victor's dad. He's my dad. And Jerry hears the name Frankenstein. He's like, you're coming with me. And he kills him. He takes the necklace and then he comes across Justine and gives her the necklace so it'll look like she's killed him. And that's then, you know, obviously where things come full circle. And we come back to Frankenstein and Jerry talking, and Jerry's essentially like, look mate, I'm alone. If I had someone, I wouldn't feel like this. So can you make me someone else like me so we can just be happy together? We won't bother anyone. Just make someone like me so I don't feel so alone. They basically then just debate this. Frankenstein is once again, he has very selective hearing with certain things. He doesn't hear all of the stuff about, you know, the fact that he basically just abandoned Jerry to make sense of the world on his own. He doesn't hear about him being immediately hated on sight despite the fact that he's done nothing wrong. He doesn't hear any of this. All he hears is, you burned someone's house down? How could you do that? So he's basically saying no for a very long time until eventually he's like, do you know what? Okay, fine, I'll do it. I'll just do one more person for you. And then that's it. I'm done. You leave me alone and I'll leave you alone. And they come to this sort of agreement. Victor goes back home and just, it feels very disconnected from his family. He's again sort of withdrawing into himself and not really engaging too much with them as he sort of prepares to do this and debates with himself whether he should do it, but is still very much adamant on doing it. As he's thinking about this, he's getting very depressed again and withdrawing into himself. And so his dad's like, I know what'll make you feel better. You're gonna marry Elizabeth like you were always supposed to. You know your adopted sister that we've always just called your cousin? Yeah, you're gonna marry her. That's not weird, is it? Which, yeah, is fucking weird, but it was very obvious from the beginning of this book that this was gonna happen. And when it finally did happen, I was like, oh, okay, yeah, here it is. Great. But anyway, he's like, right, you can get married to her. And Frankenstein's basically like, look, I would love to marry Elizabeth, but I need to go to London first. He needs to speak to someone who has important knowledge about his task of creating a second human, which really makes no sense to me because he's already created one human. He knows how to do it. I don't understand why he has to go to London to speak to this person. But anyway, he's like, look, I have to go to London. I'll do that and I'll marry Elizabeth when I get back. And that is sort of the plan that they agree. He goes to London with Henry, and basically the entirety of this chapter that we're currently in, which is chapter 18, is pretty much just him talking about how nice the weather is on the ship and how much he loves Henry. That is the whole chapter. Like I said, this man does not know how to keep a story short. It's infuriating. But anyway, they arrive in London. Frankenstein obviously has this task to create this girlfriend, I don't know, this lover, whatever, for Jerry. And as you know, as he has done continually throughout this book in terms of how he's telling his story, he pursues this task with all of the urgency of a sloth. He meets with different people that he needs to meet with to get this knowledge, even though he already fucking has the knowledge, so I don't understand what he's talking about. While Henry is then off speaking with other people that he came to speak with, Victor is off gathering more materials. So again, he's digging up bodies, getting parts ready to put this person together for Jerry. They then decide to basically do a road trip through England. So there's someone in Scotland who wants to talk to them. So they're like, yeah, let's just like stop at a few places along the way and have a nice time. And firstly, mate, you've got a job to do. Just do it. You're whining about having to do it. Just get it done and get it over with. What are you doing? 2, it's the 1800s. How are you keeping these body parts fresh and like, you know, worthy to be used if you're just traveling up the country, which would have taken a really long time? What the fuck are you doing? But anyway, they get up to Scotland and they split up because Frankenstein's like, he obviously doesn't want to do this with Henry around. He doesn't want Henry to know what he's doing. So He finds a really remote place in what sounds like the Highlands, but I don't actually remember where it was or if he says where it was. He finds a really remote place and where there's no one around, so he can start his work of creating Jerry's girlfriend. Victor gets to work, and from here on, starts making the girlfriend, but the whole time he's just whining about it. He keeps being like, is this a good idea? Should I be doing this? Is she gonna agree to stay away from humans the way Jerry has? What if she's just as murderous as Jerry is and starts killing more people? Again, just missing the entire thing, that the whole reason Jerry did that is because Victor just abandoned him and left him to survive on his own in a world of people who obviously wouldn't understand him. But anyway, he's being a whiny, self-suffering asshole about it. It's sort of still going on with doing it, but he's clearly in two minds about doing it. And then Jerry turns up, which also, I don't know how Jerry is getting around everywhere. He just appears everywhere. I don't know how he's doing it, how he knows how to navigate or anything like that, but he just does. It's just something we should ignore. He turns up and is really happy. He's like, oh, he sees because the thing's done. All he needs to do is reanimate the body. He sees it and he's like, oh my god, it's a person like me. Frankenstein, upon seeing this, is like, actually no, and just starts destroying it, just starts ripping the body apart, which must have just been heartbreaking for Jerry, honestly. Understandably, Jerry is very upset about this, and they argue about this. He basically threatens Frankenstein with like, I'm gonna ruin your whole fucking life, and I think he says something like the next time he'll see him is on his wedding night, so clearly he knows that Frankenstein and Elizabeth getting married. Frankenstein takes this threat to mean that Jerry is going to kill him on his wedding night, but doesn't really, it's not, right now he doesn't think too much of it. He's anguishing a bit, but then he gets a letter from Henry who asks him to come back because Henry's gonna go off to India to do something, and he wants to see Victor before he leaves. So Frankenstein's kind of a bit distracted and is like, okay, well, I'll go see Henry, but first I need to dispose of these body parts that I've been collecting. So he goes out in a little boat and just chucks them in the sea. And then because he's an idiot, he falls asleep in the boat in the middle of the sea. So he wakes up and has no idea where he is because it's just like a little boat. It's not like anchored anywhere. He just is floating around all night. And then when he finally sees land, he pulls up and he's like, hey chaps, where am I? And it's a load of Irish people who hate him immediately. They think he's murdered someone for some reason. So they bring him in to the magistrate to sort this out. Frankenstein is brought before this magistrate and he's like, I have not killed anyone. I don't know what's happening. I'm innocent, so clearly nothing bad's gonna happen. Even though earlier in the story, Justine, you know Justine was innocent and she still got hanged, so I don't know why you thought that. Essentially, there was a dead body found during the night, sort of near the water. Could have been washed up or most likely was just left there. And there's quite a few people who saw Frankenstein's boat just like around the time of that, so they're like, it must have been him. He must have deposited there and then sort of sailed off. Frankenstein is then brought to see the body in an attempt to be like, look, see how he reacts to it, if it's the reaction of a murderer or not. And who is the body? It's Henry, his best friend, who he spent a whole chapter talking about how much he loved. Henry's dead, which honestly I was a bit shocked by. That actually. That was quite good writing. Frankenstein, as we know, Frankenstein is sensitive. He gets severely unwell for months just from being happy that Jerry's run away. So Frankenstein falls into another one of his month-long illnesses from seeing Henry's body. He's basically kept in prison but sort of nursed and sort of helps to get better for like 2 months or something. For some reason the magistrate is really nice to him, which just doesn't really make sense to me. But anyway, the magistrate just takes a liking to him. Even when Frankenstein is like ranting and raving about how it's his fault and how he's killed them because of what he's done, the magistrate is still like, yeah, I don't think he's the murderer. I'm gonna take a shining to him for some reason. And he's ended up sort of cleared of all charges and is able to go back to Geneva with, his dad comes and takes him back to Geneva. Throughout this whole chapter, it's again just Frankenstein being miserable and wishing he was dead, essentially. While they're traveling back, he gets a letter from Elizabeth who's basically like, look, I really want to marry you, but I feel like you're only marrying me because of like a feeling of honor and that you have to. So if that's why you're marrying me, don't. But if you genuinely do want to marry me, we can get married. So Frankenstein writes back and is like, no, I do want to marry you, but something really awful's happened. I've made a huge mistake. I'll tell you the whole story after we're married. I feel like, personally, if I was Elizabeth, firstly, I wouldn't want to be marrying my adopted brother. But secondly, I would want to know something like that before getting married. That just seems a bit like, you're stuck now. Can't get out, because like, you know, especially in like people of their standing, divorce would have been quite frowned upon. So, you know, it's like, I've caught you and now I've told you that I've created a monster who's killed people and it's all my fault. Like, you'd want to know that beforehand. But anyway, he says he'll tell her after. When they go back to Geneva, Frankenstein is once again just really moody and in a pissy little mood. But Elizabeth generally is like the only one who can make him feel better. And then the date is set for their wedding. This sort of brings back to Frankenstein what Jerry has said to him about, the next time I see you, it'll be your wedding night. And Frankenstein basically is like, okay, either what's gonna happen is Jerry's gonna kill me and then I will be free of all this pain and it'll be fine, or I'm gonna kill Jerry and I'll be free of him and it'll also all be fine. Little did he know there's a third option, which I don't know how he didn't see it coming, but anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. So basically he's like, this is a win-win situation. Either I'm gonna die and I won't have to deal with this anymore, or he's gonna die and I can start to move forward and just live my life. They get married and then travel to some place somewhere. Elizabeth has inherited property somewhere, maybe in Austria, I don't remember where. So they travel there to sort of spend some time together after the wedding, and a lot of time is just spent by Frankenstein describing the weather and the sea and the wind on the boat. Unnecessary detail. When they get in, it's too late to keep traveling further on to where they're actually going. They're quite tired, so they stay in like a little inn in a port town to rest. And Frankenstein is just like really agitated. He's just waiting for Jerry to turn up and attack him. So he tells Elizabeth to just go to bed. But then what happens? Elizabeth is murdered by Jerry. Who saw that coming? Obviously, Jerry wasn't going to kill you, Frankenstein. He said he's going to make your life miserable. He's going to kill everyone you love. Why did you not see this coming? You fucking idiot. Anyway, she's murdered. Townsfolk come to help because she screamed, and Frankenstein thinks he sees Jerry out the window, so he's over there, and everyone tries to follow him, but Jerry just, as Jerry does, disappears because he's superhumanly fast. He's like Lightning McQueen. He's just gone. So they don't find him. Frankenstein is then like, shit, Jerry's gonna try and kill my brother and my dad if this is what he's doing. So he immediately goes back to Geneva. When his dad finds out about Elizabeth's death, he's so sad that he dies. So that's 2 people dead in a very short period of time for Frankenstein. This just kind of sends Frankenstein over the edge. He, from the sounds of it, ends up in a like inpatient unit. He's hysteric, manic, whatever they would have called it back then. And he just spends his time, again, sort of trying to recover from this awful tragedy. I don't really know what Jerry's doing in this time. I don't know if he's just biding his time, waiting for Frankenstein to come back out, or what he's doing really, but he's somewhere. When Frankenstein finally is released, he goes to a magistrate and decides to tell him the whole story, and is like, look, we need to find this guy, we need to stop Jerry. The magistrate is genuinely quite understanding and quite decent in his response to this, which you wouldn't expect, considering, if a man came up to you and was like, hey, so I stitched together a load of body parts, I then did something which I won't tell you what to create life in this body, and now that guy's walking around killing people that I care about because I abandoned him. Can you help me with that? Even in today's times where we're, more open-minded, I think we'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? No. But for some reason this magistrate is really understanding and is like, he's very reasonable. He's like, look, we could send people out, but from the sounds of what you're saying, if he's that strong, if he's that fast, I can't guarantee that we're going to catch him, or that even if we find him, we'll be able to do anything to bring him down. But we can try. He's basically setting reasonable expectations and not making Frankenstein believe that, yeah, sure, we'll catch him, we'll kill him, we'll be fine. He's just being realistic. But Frankenstein hears, no, we're not going to help you. And he's like, well, fuck you then, I'm going to go find him myself, because Frankenstein is a little bitch. So then the rest of Frankenstein is pursuing Jerry for ages. I don't remember how they end up getting on the ice. There's a whole chapter of him just pursuing Jerry for ages and trying to catch up to him and find him. It then comes back to getting on Robert's boat, where him and Jerry were on the ice together on sleds, and they get separated by a wave, and that's when he then sees Robert's bow and comes aboard. Okay, so at this point we switch back to Robert's letters to his sister. So he's transcribed the whole story to sort of send to her, and we're back in his point of view. So Frankenstein is once again quite exhausted by telling this entire story, and he basically is just saying that he wants to die and he doesn't want to have to put up with this anymore. All that he wants to do before that is find Jerry and put an end to him. Robert, who, like I said at the beginning, has become weirdly obsessed and like worshipy towards Frankenstein, is quite sad about this because he doesn't want him to die and for some reason thinks he's amazing, even though he's just heard the whole story. For some reason he thinks he's amazing. The ship, by the way, is still stuck in ice and the crew are getting quite restless. They're like, look, we would like to make it back alive, so when the ice clears, if it's possible, can we just head back home? Like, can we just abandon the original plan? Frankenstein gives some full speech about like how the crew is being selfish and they knew the dangers and why are you wanting to turn back now? And essentially he is being selfish, which makes no sense to me. He has just given Robert this whole speech about like, be careful seeking knowledge and being this obsessive over it because you don't want to end up like me, but also you need to continue your voyage solely so he can find Jerry. That's the only reason he wants to keep going. But it just kind of undercuts the whole story he's tried to, and the whole message he's just tried to get across of like, no, you need to continue with this voyage, even though the whole reason he told the story was to convince him not to do that. But anyway, Robert does eventually agree that if the ice clears enough, they will go back to England. But he is also like a bit of a little bitch about this and he's just whining about it. Frankenstein is like, look, okay, I'm going then. I need to find Jerry. But he's too sick at this point and he just passes out and can't go and pursue him on his own anymore. He gives this whole speech about how he had like a duty to look after Jerry's well-being when he's done he's never done that. He abandoned him immediately and then it's just been horrible to him. And he's like failed in his task, which, yeah, mate, you did. You really did. And he's like, look, I won't ask you to carry on. This is my problem. And then he dies. What a shame. Jerry visits to see him dead and, Robert is like, you're a fucking monster, because he loves Frankenstein for some reason. And Jerry's like, look, no. And explains like why he did all of these things again and how he's felt and all of this, and makes some really good point. Then basically says his purpose is done, he's gonna go kill himself, and scurries off. And that is the end of the book. That is it. Hello friends, my battery died on my camera and I tried to charge it, but then I didn't charge it for long enough to actually be able to finish the video, and I'm working with very limited like daylight to actually be able to finish this, and I need to finish it today so I can edit it and upload it tomorrow. So just deal with the bad phone quality for just the outro. That is the end of the story. I'm not going to go into my details and thoughts and opinions of how I actually felt about the book, because I will do that in my wrap up if you want to know my opinions on the story itself and like how I felt about it. We're just talking about the plot here with some of my own opinions kind of inserted. So I hope you have enjoyed. I appreciate it was really long, but like I said, Frankenstein does not know how to tell a succinct story, so it was very long. But yeah, I hope you have enjoyed discovering the tale of Frankenstein. Let me know what you thought about it. Are you Team Jerry or Team Frankenstein? I would be really interested to know. I hope wherever you are, you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.